In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars, they chose the wrong person to provoke, and by the time they realized, it was already too late. Dust had its own grammar in Caliche Flats. It spoke in half-phrases around boot heels. It curled punctuation under wagon rims, and when the wind lifted it just right, the dust wove sentences across the hardpan that only a few could read. Calla Merrick could read them. She could read other things, too, things that made people cross the street when they saw her coming, or hurry children inside as if a door and a prayer could keep the world tidy. Calla did not blame them for the fear. Fear had its uses. It kept men from walking off bluffs in a lightning storm, and it taught children not to grab rattlesnakes by the pretty beads of their tails. But fear, left to spread like mesquite, turned into thorns, and thorns made even the simplest tasks bleed. Calla had learned to move through town like a woman mapping thorn fields, slow, attentive, never surprised when a branch snagged. She lived at the edge of Caliche Flats in a broken-walled adobe the color of old bread. A tin cross, bent and patched with wire, hung over the door, a gift from a smith who'd needed a child's fever called down and had paid his gratitude as men did in places like this, with a useful thing and a look that said, "Don't speak of it." A single verbena grew stubbornly from a crack in the sill, its purple pinches of bloom proof that even hard seasons saved a little sweetness for the patient. At dawn, Calla carried water from the pump behind the livery, the bucket bumping her knee in a cadence the dead liked. They followed sound. They followed warmth, too, and grief, and 1,000 other small currents men refused to see. She felt them drift along after her, the quiet ones, the ones who meant no harm and kept to the fences of memory like cattle reluctant to cross. Now and again, one would brush the hair at her neck, not unkindly, like a relative missing the days before time made them strangers. "Morning, Miss Calla." The voice belonged to Rook Kestrel, the livery boy, lanky and sun-brown, with hands too large for his wrists and a kindness almost as big. He held himself like a foal, pretending he wasn't about to spook. "Morning, Rook." Calla tipped the bucket in acknowledgement, the water clucking. The dead liked Rook's voice, too, uncomplicated, honest. They leaned to it like porch sitters to a story. "You hear that coyote sing last night? Sounded like a woman trying not to cry." "Coyotes don't try," she said, and let the ghost behind him finish the thought inside her. "They just are." The ghost smelled of cedar smoke and rain. Calla did not turn to look. That invited them closer. "Everything with a throat sings," she added, "even when it sounds like grief." Rook's smile fumbled and found its footing. "Reverend Pike says grief's the devil's hook." "Reverend Pike is a man who forgets the psalms were sung," Calla said. She did not hide the dryness in it. It was good to rinse truth with humor sometimes. Kept it from cutting the tongue. "How's Harlan Sorrel?" "Better. I poulticed the fetlock like he said." Rook glanced toward Main Street. "You might not want to go that way," he said, voice lowering, like the dust when a wagon's far enough off you can pretend it isn't coming. "Pike's got folk riled. Said at prayer last night that unnatural ears breed unnatural trouble." "I was born with these ears," Calla said gently. "Same as everyone." "Not the way he tells it." "Calla Pike tells it the way fear does. It makes itself bigger by shrinking what it does not understand." Rook scuffed his boot. A ghost near him sighed. An old sigh, splintered with years. "He'll grow, if you let him." Calla let the ghost pass through her. It was like walking through shade on a hot road, cool and temporary, leaving no mark but relief.
"Thank you for the warning," she told Rook. "I'll go along the arroyo." "Miss Calla," he hesitated, a colt at a creek. "You ever get tired of it? Folks looking at you like you ain't right?" "I get tired," she said, and smiled, the kind that had to be built slow so it didn't collapse. "But not of being right. There are worse troubles than hearing what tries to be heard." He nodded, relieved by the joke. Boys liked to pretend they were men. Jokes were ladders they used for the climb. By the time Calla reached her door, the sun had pulled itself up enough to lay pennies of light across the adobe. She set her bucket down and touched the tin cross out of habit, not devotion. She had seen what devotion did to men. It made them sure, and sure men were the ones who lit the kindling. Inside, the room held the air of a place softened by use. A stove with a stubborn door, a shelf with her mother's chipped bowl, blue-painted flowers faded from years of bread, a cot with blankets the color of dry grass, and hung on a nail by the window a length of lace that was not beautiful by any town measure, but had belonged to Ma Finch, the midwife who'd taught Calla the first truth of her life. "The veil is a door, child. You can open it with your mouth if you mind your breath." Calla did mind it. It had nearly cost more than she could carry to learn how. She lit sage at the stove, set the bowl over the smoke, and hummed, low and sure. Humming made bridges. The dead didn't like it when the living called them like cows. You had to go polite. You had to give them something beautiful to come to. "Ma Finch," she said, "if you have a mind to sit a while." The room altered the way water alters when wind finds it, a ripple that didn't move things so much as remind them they could be moved. The lace lifted just enough to put a laugh in the air. "Girl," Ma Finch said, her voice still tucking a baby even from whatever place she originated now, "you sing like a kettle just before it knows it's boiling. That's a complaint." "That's a compliment. Complaints sound different, and you know it." Calla sat. The chair did its customary creak, announcing her weight to a house happy to bear it. "Pike is at it again," she said. "Rook heard him. He's stirring folk." "He's a spoon," Ma Finch said. "Spins all the time and wonders why the pot boils. I can stay to the edges, take different roads, but the edges keep moving." Calla looked to the window. Main Street ran left to right like a scar you could choose to forget until it itched. "It would be easier if I could be small." "You are small. That's most of why you do just fine." Ma Finch's laughter put bunting on the words. "Folk look at you and think, how much trouble could be inside something that size? Same way men think about rattlesnakes until they hear music." "They'll come, Ma." Calla made herself say it plain. "The day when fear asks for proof and decides it will take it in blood." "They always come." Ma Finch's voice softened. "And when they do, you will be what you have practiced to be, which is a door that opens the right way." Calla let the humming rise. She did not sing words yet. Words had edges. Edges cut. Humming was a smooth river stone. The dead liked to put their foreheads to it and rest. The room filled with the scent of sage and the soft, almost imperceptible reliefs of those who remembered mornings. A horse screamed. Not the skittering squeal of a barn argument, not the hiss a mare gives when a gelding forgets his manners. This was the kind of sound that thinned blood, a stallion's alarm, ragged and absolute. It burned through Calla's humming like a stray ember through muslin. She stood so fast the chair tipped. Outside, another scream answered, then men's voices, then the run-snow sound of hooves crowding a gate and meeting wood that would not move.
"Go," Ma Finch said. "The living are noisier when they need you." Calla was already moving. She ran down the arroyo path, skirt gathered in one palm, boots bowling pebbles into the dry stream bed. The livery yard unfolded into the hard sunlight, a pen in uproar, rails shuddering, and 3 men fanning their hats at the moving mass as if wind ever changed what horses decided when panic chose them. Isaac Hardin stood near the gate. Even his stillness had authority. He was the kind of man who could quiet a room by setting a cup down. Not because folk feared him, because he did his thinking out loud with his hands, and people trusted what hands like his decided. The Hardin spread ran west of town to the blue cut of the hills. When Hardin nodded, calves got branded and fences got mended. When he frowned, prices eased and fights ended. He frowned now. "Gate," he said. Just that. The men worked with the efficiency of those who have sweated together, slid the latch, swung the wood back. The stallion broke free, a copper blaze with eyes wide enough to tell you he remembered being a mountain and resented being made into an animal. He surged into the yard, tail flagging, head slewing to catch all possible threats in once. "Easy," Rook called, useless as any word tossed into wind. "Where's Roe?" Isaac Hardin asked, voice thin with a fear Calla had never heard in him. She looked instinctively to the left where the boy usually perched on the post, legs wound round the wood like he was made of rope. She found only splinters and a hat on the ground with its brim bent under a hoofprint. The hat was small. The hoofprint wasn't. The world did a thing it sometimes did for Calla when the dead stood up windward. The sound went narrow, like a throat that had to swallow something too big. Calla felt herself become a listening glass, the way Ma Finch had taught her when she was 13 and almost too grief-stupid to learn. Find the thread. Follow it like an ant with a purpose. She found it. It was fine as hair and bright as fish scale. It ran under the marl by the trough and draped toward the shade under the wagon. "Rook," she said, calm, low. "The wagon." Rook dove. He came up a second later with a boy in his arms. Roe Hardin, 11 this spring. Freckles like constellations you could chart a voyage by. His chest had the wrong stillness. Rook's mouth was saying something, maybe a prayer, maybe just noise to keep from drowning, but the world's sound had not widened yet, and Callie did not hear it. Isaac Hardin's knees bent the way a tree bends in wind strong enough to think it can take trees. He moved to the boy, knelt so slow it looked like he'd forgotten how. He touched 2 fingers to Roe's throat as if a pulse were a thing you could scold for going missing. "Get the doctor," someone said. "No time," Calla heard herself answer. Her voice had its work boots on. It took the direct path and never asked the thorns to be less. Isaac Hardin's eyes flicked to her and did the smallest of hard things. Judged. "Which," they said, the way men said fire when they didn't want their boys to touch it. Calla did not step away. "Please," she said. The word was a board she laid between 2 roofs so men could cross without looking down. "Let me try." "Pike says," one of the hands started. "Pike can say his sermons to the wind," Hardin said softly enough that only those closest heard. Slowly he nodded once at Calla, a bow you'd give someone who might be a blade or a salve. "If you can help, help." Rook laid the boy on the hard pan. Calla's knees met the ground. Her palms went to the small hills of Roe's ribs. His skin had the cool of milk left too long on a porch. She set her mouth near his and felt what she feared she'd feel, an emptiness shaped like a boy and already trying to forget him. She did not pray. Prayer was asking. Asking implied that something somewhere had time to decide. Calla did not give the world time. She opened her mouth and sang. The note, Ma Finch had taught her where it lived, in the pocket of the throat, just south of speaking, where lullabies are born and last words go to when they're too shy to be said. She found it, loosened it, let it circle the boy's mouth and ask politely for what had slipped. The men shifted, not because of the sound, though the sound moved the dirt like heat and made the stallion's ear tilt, but because a woman on her knees singing into a child's silence made even the hardest hands remember being boys. Roe did not breathe. Calla deepened the tone, curved it around his ears, pressed it under his ribs with the heel of her palm in the tempo of a heart that used to know how. The world narrowed further. She did not hear the men or the horse or Rook's choked pleas. She heard only the thin, bright thread under the dust and the space where it had come loose. Breath is a tether, Ma Finch had told her. If you lose the knot, you tie another. But who are you stealing the rope from? Calla asked the question she was supposed to ask. You never steal, Ma Finch had said. You bargain. What the dead still own, they'll loan if you promise to pay a sort of interest. The interest had been blood some days, hope others, secrets mostly. The dead loved secrets. They ate them slow like honey. Calla bent lower. The note slid into a hum, and then into a wordless tenderness the dead understood. Here. The emptiness tilted toward it. Calla felt the brush of a child's laugh in a place that had no room for sound. He hasn't done, she told whatever listened. He has goats to chase, and a creek to fall into twice in one afternoon, and a mare who pretends not to love him. Silence answered. The hard kind. The kind that dared you to think you could move it. Come back, she whispered, because some doors like to whisper more than a song. Ro, come back. Something in the air uncoiled. Not much, enough to make the hair on Calla's arm rise like grass remembering rain. She pressed her mouth to the boy's and gave him the smallest breath she could steal from herself. Then another, each one wrapped in the hum, each one labeled with a promise the other place could read.
A new thread touched her lip. It was colder than a creek in December and smelled faintly of wild onion. It brushed her and recoiled, shy. Calla sang to it, a mother's nonsense, the music babies are born knowing how to translate. The thread lingered. Interest, a voice said. Not Ma Finch, deeper, the kind that remembered saying a thing once and hearing it become law. What? Calla breathed against the boy's mouth. What do you want? The men strained to hear. They heard only a woman talking to a child like she'd stitched him herself and disliked doing it wrong. The cost, the voice said. You call, we answer. The door swings both directions. We will loan you breath. You will carry what we give you until we ask you to set it down. I'm already carrying, Calla whispered. I have been since I was a girl. Then you won't notice, the voice said, and touched her mouth again with the winter chill of whatever it had kept in a jar for emergencies. The thread slid between her lips, across her teeth, and into the boy, as if her mouth were a straw and the world were thirsty on his behalf. Ro flinched. Ro! Rook's voice cracked like ice, trying not to break. Ro! Calla did not stop. She pressed another breath into the boy and felt the invisible tether begin to catch, like a loop thrown from a moving horse finding the horn of a saddle. His chest trembled, once, twice, then rose shallowly, like a baby mimicking a man. Ezekiel Hardin's hand found the ground, as if the earth itself were the only thing steady enough to hold him up. Easy, he said, to nothing and everything. Ro coughed. It was a mean little cough, insulted at the dust, offended at the sun. It became a bigger cough, and then a sound that had no dignity at all, a cry that announced a return and didn't care who heard. Men cried, some of them. They did it the way storms do out on the flats, with little warning and absolutely no apology. Hardin did not. He did something more dangerous. He touched Calla's shoulder. Thank you. The words were raw as fresh-cut lumber. Calla let herself breathe fully for the first time since the horse scream. The world widened back to its normal size. The stallion sighed. Rook sat down on the ground and laughed like he'd just found water. Ro blinked up at the sky, squinted like the sun had woken him rude, and turned his head toward Calla. When he spoke, the voice that came out of his mouth was not a boy's. Midnight,
it said, in a tone like boot leather left in rain. 10, no, 9, 1 kneels. Silence clamped the yard. Rook's laugh died in it. Calla felt the borrowed thread touch her lip again, as if to remind her who had co-signed the loan. "Roe!" Hardin's voice had gone soft with terror. "Son!" "Where did you go?" Calla asked quietly. Roe's eyes rolled white. "Nowhere a man wants to name." Then the boy returned like a swallow to the lintel of its own house, and he was just a child, blinking hard and grabbing for his father's wrist and saying, "Pa." The yard breathed. Sound found its legs. Men started talking, loud to chase off the feeling they'd been touched by weather they didn't have words for. Hardin gathered his boy and held him until the holding hurt. Reverend Pike arrived then, scripture dust on his coat and certainty on his face. He took in the scene, the boy breathing, Calla on her knees, men looking at her like the wind had made a statue, and built a sermon so fast you could hear the boards creak. "What deviltry is this?" he demanded, voice like a hand you didn't ask for on your shoulder. "I heard singing." Calla said, too tired to sugar the truth. "You called spirits." Pike's eyes were the color of creosote tea, bitter, necessary to some, and bad for the gut in quantity. Ezekiel Hardin's head lifted. Men who had worked beside him for years stepped without talking to a place where their bodies could be useful if the preacher forgot he was made of words. Calla rose. Her knees stung. She let them. Pain was an honest thing. "I called breath," she said. "The rest called itself." "You bargained," Pike's lip curled. "With what?" "Not with you," Calla said. It cost her to keep the heat out of it. Anger was a man's fire. Women learned different fuels. "Roe will live. That's the sermon here." Pike's eyes flicked to the boy and back. "Alive for now. You've sewn a thread that leads hellward." He jabbed a finger toward Calla, toward the town, toward the future, like a man poking holes in a barrel he feared might explode if left whole. "Enough," Hardin said. His voice was not loud. It was the tide leaving and taking a boat with it. "My son will live. Your opinion can do what it likes out by the fence." "God will judge," Pike said, and meant, "I will." "God judges by breath," Calla answered. "He keeps count. Today his ledger smiles." Pike's mouth went flat. He turned on his heel, gathered his flock with a glare, and left a vacuum men filled with relief. Someone clapped Rook on the back hard enough to knock a cough out of him. Someone else fetched water for Calla that tasted of iron and thanks. Ezekiel Hardin faced her. He was not a man who liked debts. He settled them quick because owing made him itch. My boy spoke with a voice that wasn't his. He spoke with a mouth that was. Sometimes they carry passengers on the crossing. "What did it mean?" Hardin asked. "Midnight, dust, 10, 9, 1 kneels." "It means the road is not empty," Calla said, and did not add what the thread had pushed white cold against her lip to say, "You will pay interest. Keep him inside tonight." "I always do," Hardin said, which was true in the way men say truths when nothing strange had yet asked them to be better. "Thank you." He held out his hand. Calla took it. His palm was calloused history. He squeezed once, like a man learning the weight of new language. Word ran in Caliche Flats like chickens, everywhere and nowhere, and always leaving feathers you didn't remember belonging to the bird you'd seen. By sundown, women had washed their steps twice, and the widow Dwyer had set a plate of biscuits on Calla's sill without ringing the bell. By twilight, boys were daring each other to sing near the livery, and by full dark, 3 men were arguing at the Silver Dollar about whether what Calla had done was witchcraft or mercy or the same thing. Calla cooked onions and beans and ate them slow at the table with the scar where Ma Finch had cut cord once on an October morning when the wind was full of geese. She let her body be ordinary, That was the only way to convince it to keep being brave when the extraordinary came to the door to collect. When she was done, she set her plate aside and took up her mother's bowl. The sage had gone to ash. The room smelled of it still, the way a church smells on Wednesday, even though the candles went out Sunday. She touched the lace and waited. The air wavered. "Interest," the voice said, as if she'd tried to forget. "I remember," Calla said. "Name it." "You will carry a message," the voice said, not unkindly. The dead did not need to be cruel. Time did that work cheap. "Say the message." "9 riders," the voice said, dust like an old book, a red band at the throat. "One will kneel if you sing true. After, the cost." "After," Calla repeated. "I'll put it where?" "Where men who make fences will hear." "Harden," she said, and not because she needed to be told. The voice did not answer. It rarely bothered with what she already knew. Calla got her shawl. Night had come up the arroyo and lay thick in the road. The stars were hard and near. Crickets said their names. Somewhere a coyote tried on the sound of a woman's grief and got it right enough to make the hair at the back of her neck say, "Listen." She walked toward the hardened place with her hands in her shawl and her mouth quiet. She saved singing for when the world asked, and not 1 minute before.
The hardened house stood where the land learned to rise. Light ran along its windows like a promise not yet broken. Calla knocked. Izzet opened with his hat in his hand, as if courtesy were armor and he needed all of it. He looked older than he had at noon. Fear will do that. It sands men quicker than the weather does. "May I speak plain?" Calla asked. "I prefer it," he said. 9 riders at midnight. They'll take the road that passes the dry well. One will wear a red band at his throat. One will kneel if someone sings true. Harden's jaw worked, as if he were the grinding grain no millstone could swallow. "Us?" he asked. "Riders take what they say the road owes." Calla's fingers tightened into the shawl. "Tonight the road will owe here. You should bring your men inside the fence and teach them to be quiet. Let the riders pass if the passing is all they want. If it isn't. If it isn't. Listen for the kneeling." Harden nodded. He was too careful to promise what the night might not let him keep. "Will you be safe?" he asked, and answered himself with a breath and a shake of his head. "Is that a foolish question?" "Only if it means you want me to choose the kind of safety that leaves boys lying under wagons," Calla said. "I'll be where I can hear." He didn't say thank you. He didn't say don't. He did what men like him did when words were brittle. He put his hat on and stepped aside so she could see Ro asleep on the couch with a cat as stern as a deacon guarding his ribs. The sight made something in Calla unfist. "Tell Rook to sit under the window," she said. "He hears truer than he knows." Harden nodded again. "I will." Calla walked back into the kind of dark that makes men confess without intending to. Halfway down the road she heard hoofs. Not close, the kind of far that puts a thumbprint on your future. She did not hurry. Hurrying is an argument with time. Time wins. She went to her house and took the tin cross off its nail and set it gentle on the table and lit the sage again and sang, very low, to the lace. "Ma?" "You don't need an old woman more than you need your own wits," Ma Finch said, but she came anyway. Calla felt her the way a midwife feels dawn, somewhere behind the eyes, lifting. "They'll come," Calla said. "They always come," Ma said. "Pike will put men in the street. He'll make fear look like faith and call it duty." "Then sing for the horses," Ma Finch said. "Men follow where beasts lead when the dark eats their courage." Calla laughed once, with no joy in it. "I was beaten for singing once." "I remember," Ma Finch said, and the room remembered with her. A bruise dark as thunder along a girl's jaw, a girl who kept humming anyway because to stop would be forfeiting more than a body could afford.
Sing anyway. Kala drew a breath that had no borrowed thread in it and let it out slow. Interest, she said. You keep accounts better than most banks, Ma Finch said, but the ledger doesn't have your name in red. Keep it that way. The hooves came nearer. If you could have skinned the night and pinned it to a wall, the pattern on the hide would have been a road and 9 points of pressure moving along it. A coyote tried to tell the moon a secret and was shushed by the small sound of a gun being checked for bullets. Kala wrapped her shawl tight and went out. She did not lock her door. The only thing inside the house a thief would want was courage, and most men prefer easier theft. The town had arranged itself the way fear arranges furniture, heavy pieces shoved against doors that were never meant to be blockaded, breakables pushed to corners as if walls ever saved what wanted to shatter. Reverend Pike stood near the church with a lantern and a Bible that had spat his thumb back so many Sundays his nail wore a polished groove. He watched him instead of the road. That was the danger with sermons. They turned heads the wrong way. Home, he hissed when he saw Kala. You've done enough. I'm not done, she said. You called breath, he said, making the word a stain. You brought back more. Yes, Kala said, because lies wasted time. The first rider appeared like a scrap of night with a hat on. He came out of the east where the road lays its back against the chaparral and pretends it's not tired. The second followed. Then 3, 4, and all the others until the count in Kala's head reached 9 and stopped like it had found a stone in the trail. They moved without hurry. Men who ride like that believe the world set a table while they were gone, and the chair with their name on it will still be warm when they sit. They wore dust as if it were a church garment. Their faces were the color of a day that didn't go the way you asked it to. And at the throat of the man at their center, a red band cut the darkness like a wound that had decided to dress itself. Hardin, he called, and his voice was a whip that had done too much work and thought it deserved a rest. We're thirsty. Lights woke in the Hardin house. Not many, just enough to say, we hear you. The gate did not open. The yard did not stir. Reverend Pike lifted his lantern as if light ever made wolves less what they are. We are a town of God, he said, because at some point even men who don't want to fight will say something that gives the fight teeth. Preacher, the red-banded man said mildly, and in the space after the word you could hear men remembering a mother's hand at the back of their necks. Don't. Kala stepped forward, not far, enough to be seen by horses. They have different eyes than men. They make different decisions. She let her mouth find the humming she'd saved up and set it just above the ground where hoofs would feel it as a softness rather than a noise. The red-banded man glanced at her. You're the one who crossed the wire, he said, took breath that wasn't counted. I counted it. The ledger agrees with me. He laughed, and the men with him laughed because a leader's laugh is a rope, and they tied themselves to it without looking. We'll have a look at your ledger then, he pointed with his chin at the Hardin yard. After. The stallion from Noon stood at the far fence, every inch of him a question mark that had not yet found its sentence. He rolled one white eye towards Kala, and then toward the riders, and then back. She let the hum slip lower until it kissed the dirt. Now, the red-banded man said, and touched his spur to his horse. The animal took one step, just one. Then its knees attended to something by themselves, and the horse folded. Not a bow, not a stumble, a lowering, the kind a creature makes when it recognizes the shape at the center of the world and decides to make itself smaller, not because someone told it to, but because that's what respect feels like in a body. The man on his back swore. The others swore more because men swear hardest at what their bones understand too fast. Kala did not stop humming.
The second horse went down. The third braced and tried to climb out of the sound with its front legs. The fourth turned its head as if to ask the moon what it ought to do, and, receiving no answer, bent at the knee like a deacon in a revival he'd come to mock. "Which?" Pike breathed. And in the breath there was triumph, because fear loves to be proven right, even when the proof hurts. The red-banded man looked at Calla the way a man looks at a rattler and a rose in the same garden and realizes the fence won't keep anything out it was never meant to. "Name," he said. Not a question. A demand that assumed compliance was a kind of courtesy he'd forgotten how to ask for. "Calla Merrick," she said. He shifted his weight like he was testing whether anger sat better on one hip or the other. "They say you talk to ghosts." "They talk to me," she said. "I answer. It keeps me from being rude." "I got a ghost who wants to speak," he said, and the men behind him laughed a little too quickly. He had to keep his rope tight, or the horse would go, and a leader without a horse is a man on the ground, human, in a way bullets and mud like. "Let him," Calla said. He smiled then, something knife-thin. "She's got jokes." He leaned forward, and the red cloth at his throat caught the lantern light like a warning a man puts on himself so you don't have to waste breath giving it. "Move aside." "Or," Pike prompted, hungry for a scripture that would let him turn his hunger into righteousness. The red band lifted his hand. His man reached for guns like gravity had shifted and made reaching downhill. "Or we take what the road owes with or without your singing." Calla let the hum hitch just enough to teach the horses what kneeling could mean if they wanted it to. Far down the street, a window blind lifted. Rook's profile cut itself against the lamplight behind it, the boy listening because she'd told Hardin he should. "Take water. Take rest. The road is a cruel mother. Let her children drink." "We'll drink where thirst tells us," the man said. His eyes flicked to the Hardin house, where a figure moved behind the curtains in the measured way of someone who counts before he loads. Calla reached for the note Ma Finch called the hinge, the one that rounds a door and makes it swing whisper soft. She put it under the horse's feet, and the animal closed its eyes like a drunk remembering a lullaby. A woman near the church gasped, "You see? You see?" Pike left at his Bible. "Abomination!" he announced, to the night, to the riders, to his own fear which loved being named. The red-banded man cocked his head. "Sing again," he told Calla, "but make it about mercy this time. My beasts are tired. I've been singing mercy since I learned the tune. You're the one who hears it like a dare." His smile failed. You could almost hear it crack. Pride has a sound when it breaks. It's quiet and expensive. Enough. He slipped off the kneeling horse with the efficiency of a man who's practiced being obeyed, drew a pistol smooth as a prayer said too many times, and aimed not at Calla, but at the Hardin window where a boy slept and a cat took its job personally. Calla stopped humming. Silence flooded the street. The horses, relieved of responsibility, surged to their feet like men told the boss has left town. The riders shifted. Wood creaked in door frames where wind had pressed themselves flat to keep from being visible. Somewhere a baby cried because it is a baby's job to remind the night there are reasons to be kind. The gun in the red-banded man's hand did not waver. "Here's my ledger," he said softly, and you could hear the road in it, the long hunger of it. "You sang your way into a debt. I'll collect it in the simplest coin there is." Keller reached for the note again and found the space where singing doesn't live, the place beyond sound, the place where a mouth is only a door and breath is what walks through. She opened it. Wind lifted the dust in a way that wrote sentences. The horses turned their heads. Rook at the window lifted his chin as if someone had put a hand under it. Ezekiel Hardin shifted a curtain and set his jaw where men do when a boy is the only country they have left. "Don't," Calla said, but it wasn't to the man with the gun. It was to the part of the night that listens to choices and makes a list. The red-banded man's finger tightened. Roe Hardin woke all at once the way boys do when the world knocks instead of taps. He sat up, the cat launching from his chest like an accusation, and shouted something he did not understand, but that was not his voice at all, and every horse in the street went still as if a lightning bolt had asked them to hold their breath to keep the sky from breaking. The gun fired. The window shattered. A boy's scream split the dark. Calla's mouth found a note no one had ever taught her and put it into the street like a blade. You could walk if your feet were brave enough. Everything fragile learned what being a belle felt like. And then, before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you.
And then, a crack like a board breaking against a post tore the night in half. Glass burst outward from the hardened window and fell in a scatter of cold stars onto the porch boards. The cat became a gray streak. Rose's scream was a boy's, high and furious at the world for daring. Calla did not flinch from the sound of the shot. She flinched from the way the air sagged after, like a lung forgetting its job. She pushed the note she'd found through that sag, the way a woman pushes a shoulder under a heavy beam and says, "We're not done here." The bullet buried itself in a mantel beam and spat splinters. Rose's hand flew to his ear, blood like paint at the lobe, bright and enraging because of what it might have been. Hardin's silhouette clapped to the boy's head like a bandage that knew its place. The red-banded man had already adjusted his stance for a second shot when the ground took him by the knees. It didn't trip him. It didn't pitch him forward like a drunk. It asked him to acknowledge something older than guns, and he'd forgotten the word. His legs answered for him. He folded, bewildered fury meeting dirt, his pistol arm jerking up in a reflex that hit nothing but the night. His hat slid. The scarf at his throat, so certain of its authority, went crooked. One kneels. Calla felt the prophecy click into the world like a gear finding a tooth. The sound of it, to her, was the softest there. She held the hinge note under the horse's feet, low as breath before a kiss, and watched the horse's mounds make new shapes, fears, mostly. "Cade," one said. The name landed with grit. Cade Varlin, the kind of name that tasted like someone had chewed on it first. "What?" "Stand," Varlin snarled, trying. His arms had not agreed to this posture, and their rebellion made him clumsy. The pistol stayed pointed generally toward the hardened place, because a man's habits don't quit just because his pride trips, but his elbows trembled like a boy's in his first winter without gloves. "Stay," Calla told the ground, and the ground, being old and charmed by women who knew how to ask, obliged. Reverend Pike's lantern wobbled. The Bible in his fist looked suddenly the size of a shield instead of a book. "Witch," he pronounced, none too quietly. Hardin's voice cut the word in half. "Preacher," he said, and there was nothing derringer or sermon about the way he said it. "Enough." Across the fence, Rook's face hovered in the broken window, pale as lard in lamplight, eyes huge. He turned his head toward Calla as if the panic in the room were a strong river and she the stone he'd learned to stand on in flood. Calla let the hum float out over the street like a blanket for a company of babies who did not deserve the night's meanness. The horses breathed it in, those big lungs made for distances and running away. Ears sifted the sound. One snorted softly as if to say, "You remembered the song we forgot." Varlin laughed once, too sharp to be anything but a crack. "Parlor tricks," he said. "You can make beasts kneel? I've put better on their knees for less." "You're on yours," Calla said, and let the truth stand without furniture. He looked at her as if she was the particular calculus that had always made him mean, small, precise, true, and infuriating. "Name the bargain," he said, as if a deal could be switched out like a shirt. You think I don't know how this goes? You sing. The air goes queer. My boys' animals remember their mothers. Fine. We'll drink, we'll rest, and in the morning I'll come back with fire. You'll leave when your thirst is tidy, she said, and you won't point a gun at that window again. Or, Pike breathed, avid as a knife collector at a fair, or you'll discover what a throat is for besides talking. Calla's voice didn't rise. It traveled close to the dirt where power liked to walk when it wanted to go far. Varlin's smile cut his face into a map of roads he'd ruined. You think you know how this goes? He wet his lips. Pride does that when it gets nervous. It thinks salt will fix what mercy might. Boys, he said, without looking away from Calla, aim for the singer. Metal sighed out of leather up and down the line. The horses shifted, uneasy at men deciding ugly. Calla tasted blood at the back of her tongue, not hers, memory, old and obstinate. Rook, she said, without turning, under the sill. There was a scrabble of obedience and a muffled, yes, ma'am, like a hand had walked over his mouth to keep him from being louder than courage. Calla let the hum swell until it grazed the edge of song. At that rim, notes grow teeth. They bite different things depending on who's listening. The mares in the line breathed out so long their ribs seemed to sigh. One of the geldings sagged against his cinch and rolled an eye at the moon as if it needed explaining. Varlin's gun arm trembled. He steadied it with the other hand. "Shoot, damn you," he hissed. No one did. It wasn't miracle. It was arithmetic. A bullet in this light might find a horse's neck before a witch's mouth, and even the most obedient of men know which sin their boss will beat them for. A mutter moved through the riders with the sound of men considering math after a long day. "Drink," Calla said again, as if the word were a bridge she was tired of holding up herself. "Take water at my trough?" he sneered. "Teach your fence builder to be grateful for the slop we leave?" He threw his chin toward the hardened place. "Open the gate!" The gate did not oblige. It worked for Hardin, not for men who thought orders and ownership were synonyms. Varlin swiveled his pistol toward Calla. He might have pulled the trigger out of sheer habit, amphibian as malice is in men like him. But Rose said a word from the broken window, and the word wasn't English or Spanish or any tongue men claim. It was the sound newborn lungs make the instant they decide life is a good idea, after all. Varlin flinched. He couldn't help it. The body knows certain words even if the mind pretends it doesn't. The gun dipped. Calla slipped a half-breath into the space his hesitation made and hung it like a charm over the street. "That boy," he said, eyes cutting toward the window. "He's wrong. He's alive. That's all the math you need." Pike took the opening Varlin's uncertainty made. He stepped forward, lantern lifted so high it golded his beard cheerfully, like a portrait of a man who had never been wrong in his own house. "You hear me now," he boomed at the riders. "This town answers to law and God. You'll take your—" Varlin shot the lantern. It went out like a star being taught humility. Darkness snapped down. For a heartbeat, the only light was moon and the small household flames that sneak around curtains when men try to smother them. The street inhaled. The horses did too. You can hear it. The moment beasts and town agreed to be one thing because terror braided them quick. Calla didn't hum this time. She said a name. Not Varlin's. The roads. Some roads have names if you're rude about it, but most prefer the ones they made for themselves when water taught them which way to go. She said the real one, the one that sounded like wind learning a woman's laugh. The road answered. Dust lifted in a long exhale and drifted across boot tops and hoof fetlocks, and the ankles of men who had not planned on being asked to consider their feet. When the dust laid itself down again, Varlin's pistol lay in it, and his hand was empty. He looked at his fingers as if they'd defected. "Drink," Calla said a third time, because children and men like Varlin sometimes need teaching in threes. "Drink, rest, then go."
Something in his face unclasped. Not mercy. Calculation of a variety so old it looked like surrender until it stood up. He flicked his wrist, and one of his men tossed him a second gun with a little flourish that said, "We've practiced this." He leveled it, quick and narrow, not at the hardened place now, but at Calla's face. "Then sing," he said softly. "Sing with a hole where your mouth was." Calla didn't think. She'd used up thinking. She was the note by then. The hinge and the board and the door and the hand that turns it. She opened her mouth and let the oldest sound she owned walk out. It was the sound women made over bread bowls when the wind wanted to sneak under the door. It was the sound sages burn to. It was the sound you make when a calf is ill, and the only way to keep from scaring it worst is to make your voice the definition of here.
Stacked verses like logs, and someone behind Zeke pushed, and then the whole knot of them found that ugly momentum humans get when they were on her side. Varlin fired. The bullet met the sound and did something Calla had never asked a piece of lead to do. It slowed. It learned manners. It went through her hair and took 2 black strands with it as a souvenir and buried itself in a post that had seen more righteous labor than most men in town. Silence had a shape after that. It crouched. It waited to see what kind of creature it might have to become, panics or prayers. Varlin swore, lower this time. Something like bewilderment lived under the cussing. "What are you?" he said, which is what men say when their own choices show them a mirror that doesn't flatter. "Working," Calla said. "You should try it. You'd sleep better." Laughter cut the night, quick and involuntary. Not the riders, the townsfolk's. The sharp, ridiculous relief of it tilted the world half an inch toward ordinary and reminded everybody they were not just characters in a story being told by fear. Varlin stood. Calla led him there because she couldn't hold him there and still keep the horses' hearts under her palm with the hum. He rubbed his knees, furious at the dirt for what his pride had decided his bones had done. "We'll be back when the moon's got no face," he said. "We'll come quiet. Gates won't hear us. Your song won't either." "Come day or dark," Hardin said from the doorway, voice steady in the way men build porches, plank by plank with eyes on weather. "You won't find what you came for." "Won't I?" Varlin's teeth showed in a smile that had forgotten its job was to mean joy. "You built fences, Hardin. Fences keep plenty in." He jerked his chin. His men eased their horses backward the way you take a pot off a fire and hope you didn't crack the bottom. When he mounted, the animal trembled, but obliged, because even respect has to remember bread. He put 2 fingers to the red cloth at his throat, as if reminding himself what color he liked to be. "You," he said to Calla, conversational now, like men are after deciding not to kill someone this minute. "You owe. The world keeps a ledger." "I know. I pay on time." They went. Not far, just far enough to make the street decide it had its own shape again. Calla felt the hum she'd held go looking for a place to sit. She put it down gentle. The horses shivered like men leaving a church they hadn't wanted to enter, and walked with their heads lower than pride would have picked. Men exhaled. Windows unlatched. A woman laughed in a way that said crying would be too much work just now. Pike found his voice at the exact second the danger both had and hadn't passed. "Seize her," he said, triumph spilling out of him like soup boiling over a lip, "before the devil hides his pet." Hardin moved without shouting. He stepped into the street and set himself between Calla and men who weren't sure if they were about to be a mob yet. He had no gun in his hand. He had his hand. Some men are weapons enough when they decide to be walls. He night. Especially tonight. Pike replied, "While her spell hangs weak." He pointed to the broken window, to the cradle of light where Ro's head was, bare and alive, and too much proof for a man who profits on doubt. "Look what she did. She twisted the air, made beasts bow, stopped a bullet like a story. That is not God." What kept my son breathing, Hardin, is not your concern. It's all our concern. You think you can shelter witchcraft inside a fence and it won't set the grass on fire. She bargains with graves. That dead will come due on your doorstep. Calla watched faces. She had learned when she was a little that faces were clouds that told weather if you paid attention. Some wore the look of men who didn't know how to calibrate gratitude against fear. Some looked like men who had decided already and would not say it out loud until there were more of them. Roop slipped from the window and reappeared at her side with the quiet a boy learns hauling buckets before sun. "Miss Calla," he said softly, as if saying her name could be a shield. "Home, Rook. Make sure your animals are tied and your doors are board." "Board?" He frowned, thrown. "Board. The kind of quiet that keeps ears from being borrowed." He nodded like he understood anyway and took 2 steps before Pike's hand anchored him by the sleeve. "Where you think you're running?" Pike demanded. Calla moved so the preacher had to look at her to keep his balance. "He's going home," she said. "Let go." Pike did because he had grabbed a boy by mistake when he meant to grab power. He covered the error with a sermon, which is what men do when their hands misplace their courage. "I said, seize her." The first man to move was Bradley Lish, who owed Pike money and had decided to pay it with a service. He came in quick and sideways like the kind of dog that bites babies. Hardin's hand met his chest and taught it to step back instead. Bradley reconsidered the arithmetic of piety. The second was Zeke Tiller, who would have told you the bottle taking residence in his liver had nothing to do with his temper. He reached for Calla's arm. She let him take it. If she pulled, things would tear worse. If she sang, this would be about magic. She wanted it to be about men. "Gently," she said, "because sometimes a body doesn't know the difference between a hold and a hurt until you tell it to." Zeke's grip eased. Then Pike's voice spoke up, and suddenly it was more than one hand, more than one man who think virtue is a crowd sport. Calla kept her feet under her. She had practice at being moved by those who didn't know the weight they were putting on. Hardin went with her, then in front of her, then beside her again because there were too many of them to be just one man's job. "Stop," he said. "Pike, call them off." "I'm not calling the devil off anything. She's called this on herself. The Lord says breathe. And I did." Someone's hand found her hair. The tug bent her head. The street tilted. A boot glanced her shin. Pain rang its small, honest bell. She focused on it. She let it be anchor and not storm. "Don't you—" Rook said again. He had found his feet. His mouth bled at the corner, a small penny of red that made Calla's hands itch for a cloth. He moved toward Pike like someone who had never been taught what he couldn't do.
"Boy," Pike warned. "Don't," Rose said, and his voice, Rose, only Rose this time, came from the broken window like a prayer that hadn't learned shame yet. "Pa?" "I'm here," Hardin said, without turning his head. "I'm right here." Pike raised his hand. Zeke took his belt out because men don't carry whips to church, but they carry plenty of things that can be taught to act like one. The leather hissed like a snake that wished it knew hymns. "Stop," Ma Finch said near Calla's left ear. Calla almost smiled, which would have been a mistake. "Thought you didn't come when I didn't need you," she said between her teeth. "I make exceptions for fools," Ma Finch said tartly. "Bend your knees when the belt comes. Don't give him your back square." The first strike landed on a slant instead of a square, where Ma told her to put it. Pain walked its fast dog down her spine and sat. She kept her mouth open, not to scream, to keep from biting her own breath as it tried to leave. "Again," Pike instructed, and there was no joy in it. Joy would have made him human. This was duty, the sort that lets men do harm with their heads high. The second found a rib and wrapped itself around it like a ring that was too tight. The third found a memory from years ago and made it yelp in the present. Calla hummed. Not a song, Not anything that would tell the horses to kneel or the road to intervene. A small noise just big enough to remind her ears they. Listen, Ma Finch said, not to the belt, to the world trying to be kind anyway. She did. Between the strikes were crickets and a woman crying, and Rook breathing hard on purpose because he'd learned men stopped caring about your oxygen when there's a crowd, and the cat inside the Hardin place growling because it had been asked to be a sentry and would not fail. Stop, Hardin said, and when Pike ignored him, the sound of a gun being cocked made the street stiffen. Hardin didn't aim at a man. He aimed at the sky. He fired. The crack went up, 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 and told the stars to witness themselves. Do not, he said, and it was not a request. Pike lowered his hand, not for the gunshot, but because the townsfolk had discovered something while pretending their neighbor's blood was education. It made them sick. Shame is a slow creature, but it has good teeth when it remembers how to bite. Zeke's fan shook. He let the belt fall. Untie her, Hardin said. No one moved. Untie her. Rook stepped forward and fumbled the knot like a boy trying to free a rabbit from a snare he himself set because he thought hunger justified everything. The rope gave. Calla's wrists bloomed in a new pattern of red. She tucked them small against her belly and didn't thank anyone. You don't thank men for deciding to stop being what they shouldn't have been. Pike gathered his sermon to his chest like a baby he'd found in the dust. This town will learn, he said. If not now, then when the cost walks up your porch steps and asks for bread. The cost is already here, Calla whispered, more to herself than to him. The air had shifted, the way a room shifts when someone important you can't see has entered it. Cold brushed her mouth like a winter glove. After, the voice had promised. After the cost. She had promised. She had not read the fine print, because there had not been any. There had only been a boy's breath, and the sound of a horse remembering its knees. Row, she whispered. Don't come out here. Stay with the cat. Stay with your father's hat if you can't manage the cat. Rook, Hardin barked. Water, and nothing, Pike choked. If the honest word he said all night. Calla groped for the hinge note like a woman in a river groping for a branch. Her fingers found only cold. After the cost. She had promised. She had not read the fine print because there had not been any. There had only been a boy's breath and the sound of a horse remembering its knees. Ro's little face appeared in the window again, candle behind him making a halo men like Pike would have sold for parts. Miss Calla, he whispered, and the whisper carried. I didn't mean to take. I don't want you to. Inside, Hardin said, without looking away from Calla. Now. The word had mercy in it and command in equal parts, and the boy obeyed the part that kept him small and safe. The cold became a weight, a good one in its way, honest as debt, exact as law. Her chest protested once, twice, then even protest seemed frivolous. She met the dark with her mouth open and her hands palm up as if she were ready to receive what it brought. Miss Calla, Rook said again, very near now, voice shaking as if containing a bigger voice he borrowed for emergencies. Please. Hardin's arm was the only thing keeping her from the dirt. He said her name the way a man says stay to a horse, voice low, the vowel a hand under a chin. Calla. She wanted to answer. She wanted to teach them all how to bargain better, how to borrow only what you can carry, how to sing around the edges of a promise without falling in. She wanted to. There wasn't room. The last thing she heard was Ma Finch swearing in a language older than churches, and the last thing she saw was the moon deciding it had looked enough for one night and stepping behind a thin shawl of cloud. The world pinched to a point, sharp as a thorn, and everything went.
Black. Not the kind that lives behind shut eyes, not the gentle curl of sleep. A black that had edges and kept moving them, testing where a mouth might be if it wanted to open. Calla did not have a mouth. She had the memory of one. She moved toward that memory the way a thirsty woman moves toward the sound of a pump. Interest, said the voice that loved rules. It did not come from a place. It came from everywhere the dark touched, which meant it had a fine selection of thrones. I paid, Calla thought, except thoughts were heavier here. She had to shoulder them like sacks. I gave you the right to come for me after. After, the voice agreed. This is after. She looked for fear, couldn't find it. Fear belongs to bodies, mostly. What she had instead was a stubbornness the midwife had once called her other spine. Tell me the shape of the price, Calla said. Don't make me guess. Guessing breaks more than it binds. Someone must carry what was borrowed until it fits where it was meant to live, the voice said. You asked it out. It will need escorting back. You will be that road. Breath? Calla asked, though she knew. The boys rose. A rope she'd pulled across a gap that had measured itself wrong and called the difference fate. Not only, said the voice, breath is a thin rope. We prefer stronger cord. A name, another voice suggested, kind as a hand under a chin. Ma Finch from somewhere just to Calla's left that had no geography in it. Names not better. Loan yours if you must. Keep the short one for yourself. The long one belongs to work. Calla would have smiled if she had lips. She only ever had one. Calla. The dark rippled, amused without malice. You have 3, it said. The one you answer to, the one the town uses when it wants to make you small, and the one we wrote in the ledger when you were born. What's written? She asked before she could help it. The answer touched her like a cloth dipped in river cold. Calandra Finch Merrick. It was too big for her and exactly right. It went from the base of her skull to the arches of her feet, and lived there as if it had been waiting for her to grow into it. Take the long one, the voice said, carry it into the breathing world, lay it in the right mouth, then you can take your little one back and make soup with it until you have to sing again. Whose mouth? She tried to turn toward the question, and found that in this place turning was a kind of remembering. Images came as smells, sage and milk, and the metal in new blood. The one who invited you to debt, the voice said, and now it was not tender. The boy you kept. He spoke a word that was not his. He opened a gate. Close it without slamming it on anything that shouldn't be crushed. The black shuddered, not with malice, with a kind of schedule. Now, it said, with the tidy pleasure of an accountant. Calla. Her name, her short one, came like a warm hand out of the river. She grabbed it. The world rose under her like a horse asked to be steady, and she remembered how to be a woman who had weight and wrists and a back that stung. Sound arrived first, Rook's breath in little stabs, Hardin saying her name again as if the syllables were a rope he could throw, Pike's whisper that mistook itself for a prayer, the whole town holding its lungs like children in a game of stillness they never win. Light followed, slow and disobedient, as if it didn't like the way men had used it lately. She did not yet have air. She had the shape her ribs made without it, like a basket, empty of fruit and stubborn about it. "Miss Calla," Rook said, and his voice was so naked that it made her want to pick up the sky and put it over him like a quilt. She opened her eyes. The stars rushed back to their places as if they'd been caught leaning too close. Rook's face occupied the space where a person might put hope if they were in a hurry. Hardin was above her, not touching, palms open, as if he were waiting to receive something he had no practice catching. "Breathe," Ma Finch said into the living part of the world, which was unfair of her, and she knew it. "Child, don't get clever. Bring it in." "I am the road," Calla told herself, because if she tried to be lungs, she'd fail, and she could not afford that just now. She gathered the long name the dark had given her, Calandra Finch Merrick, and held it between her teeth the way a woman holds pins while she hems a skirt. She turned to Ro. "Come here," she said. It came out like gravel. She made it gentler with her eyes. Hardin made an involuntary sound and then covered it like a man who'd spilled grain and managed to catch most of it with his apron. "Ro, don't. Bring the boy," Calla whispered, and Hardin, who had learned in one day to hate and love everything he did not control, obeyed. Ro slid out of the window frame and came to the porch on tender feet, the cat marching right behind him like a small general suspicious of treaties. The boy's face had that post-sickness transparency that makes mothers sob quietly into dish towels. He knelt because small boys know how, without pride or calculation, knees to wood, hands on his thighs like a promise he wasn't done making. "Say your name," Calla told him. "All of it." He blinked. "Ro Ezekiel Hardin." She nodded. The long one fit him like good boots. "Now say mine." "Calla," the long one, and she let the ledger's cold brush her lips so he would hear what she heard. Ro's eyes widened. He looked toward nothing humans could see, then back at her. In a voice that sounded like a bell taught humility, he said, "Calandra Finch Merrick." Calla's chest didn't fill. It remembered how. That was enough for this second. "Good," she said. "Now listen. You opened a door with a word that wasn't yours. That happens. You're forgiven by everyone that matters. But doors like to be handled certain ways or they pinch." She raised one cramped hand. "You're going to give me back what I loaned you, and I'm going to carry it the rest of the way." Ro's lip trembled. "I don't know how." "You do," she said, "because he did. Boys who grow up around animals learn to teach their bodies what their mouths aren't ready to say." Pike found his footing on a sermon and tried to walk it toward them. "Don't touch her. She's unclean. The child must be kept from the contagion." Hardin turned his head slowly, the way a man looks at a snake he hasn't decided whether to kill or move with a stick. "Another word like that, and I'll teach you the contagion of silence." Pike, for once, obeyed nothing, which happened to be the right thing to do. Ro leaned close. Calla made her mouth a door again, not to sing, not to steal, merely to wait. The boy's breath smelled like milk and the panic of the recent dead. He put it against her lips like a gift that needed carrying and had decided who could be trusted with packages. "Slow," she whispered. "Don't shove it. Let it want me." He nodded once fiercely and was careful in the way boys can be when adults trust them with something that matters. Air touched her. It was the shy kind, the sort that will run if you talk about it too much. She didn't. She let it find her teeth and the roof of her mouth and the old path down her throat that had been closed not by accident, but by agreement. She did not break the agreement, she amended it. My breath for his breath, she told the dark that keeps ledgers. My long name for his short days. The interest walks with me. The cold at her lip eased. Somewhere just to the left of where bodies end, a thumb scrawled a line under a column and made a neat check. Her chest moved. It was small, and it hurt, and it was glorious. She made another. The world sharpened as if someone had licked a thumb and rubbed dust off the edge of it. Sound stretched.
Rook made a noise that didn't know what it wanted to be and decided to be a laugh because anything else would have undone him. Hardin closed his eyes once, as if he were telling them something in a language that doesn't tolerate being looked at. "Good," Ma Finch said. She sounded like a woman setting a loaf on a windowsill. "Now up." "Up?" Calla croaked. "You think they'll let you rest after this?" Ma Finch asked. "Get your feet under you before the preacher remembers he knows where they keep rope." Hands came then. Not too many, just the ones that had learned the difference between helping and handling. Hardin's were steady. Rook's shook like a colt's, but found the places that didn't hurt to touch. Roe was grave importance, held the shawl and put it around Calla's shoulders like a blanket with a job. "Home," Calla said, meaning her own. The lace, the bowl, the tin cross that had been taken off its nail to make room for what the night required. "I can work there." "You won't work at all," Pike said. His voice gathered courage from proximity to fences and the knowledge that men get violent when they've been scared too long. "Preacher, find something useful to do or go to bed," Hardin said without turning. Calla didn't want to fight in the street where the horses still remembered kneeling and the dust still remembered being written on. She took one step. Her knees swore. She took another. The town arranged itself to allow passage. Shame had finished sharpening its teeth and had begun to bite. "Rook," she said, "run ahead. Light the stove. Sage." He went like boys go when sent on a task that lets them be bigger than their fear. "Row," Hardin said softly behind her. "Inside." The boy obeyed, but his gaze stayed on Calla until the door took it away. The cat watched her too, narrow-eyed. Cats recognize debt. They know the smell of it. They were gods before they were pets, and they remember the prestige. Her adobe greeted her with the dry quiet of a place that has learned to hold space for the unusual without gossiping about it. Rook had built the fire too hot on purpose. Sometimes boys think heat is the same as safety. The stove accepted the insult and did the right thing anyway. Calla sank to the chair, which complained on cue. Rook hovered near the bowl, sage in awkward hand. "Do I?" she said. "You do. Counterclockwise for calling, clockwise for thanking. Remember that, and you'll keep your eyebrows." He grinned, a cracked little thing that let out more light than it let in. He did as he was told. Smoke rose and turned the edges of the room from hard to possible. Hardin stayed near the door. He had become a hinge, too, swinging between town and house, between man and wall, between father and something the night had made out of him without asking. "Tell me the rest," he said, when the room had done its initial shifting into a place where words could matter again. Calla closed her eyes. The black she found there was hers now, the domestic kind that comes when lids lower, and not the ledger's jurisdiction. Rook opened something when he spoke with a voice he didn't own. The breath borrowed to keep him has to learn the road back, or it will try to make a home in him where it doesn't belong. That's when folk go strange. Not evil, just misbuttoned. Can we make the road? We can lay stones. We can sing. We can be polite to the dark like it's an old aunt with bad knees and a good memory. She rubbed the rope marks on her wrists absently and then stopped, because the body enjoys habits more than it should. "Resistance let me," she said.
I answered with a yes that wasn't for you or anyone else. That's my story, Hardin. Don't make it worse. Hardin's jaw made a small change, the kind men make when they are remeasuring themselves to fit a problem. And you? He asked. I pay, Calla said simply, for a while. With the long name, with quiet. She opened her eyes and held his. It will try to take more. You cannot let Pike name that theft righteousness. Hardin snorted softly, which from him was the equivalent of an oath in another man's mouth. Pike lost the right to name anything tonight. Don't count on that, Calla said. Men like him plant flags in ash and call it a sanctuary. Rook cleared his throat, which sounded like a bird trying out a new song and hoping it belonged to him. Miss Calla? Yes, Rook. When you were... She gestured at the space where her absence had been. I thought about mouth to mouth, like you showed when Miss Daly fell in the creek last spring and breathed wrong, but I couldn't. She did fine. Better than fine. You gave me a reason to make the ledger listen. His ears went red. I ain't much good with numbers. You will be, she said. You count the right things. A sound like a tired bird hit the window then. Soft, quick. Rook startled. The sage smoke went a little sideways. The sound came again, a pebble. Hardin was at the door before the third. He opened it to a woman with her hair in a night plait and her fear tucked into the corners of her mouth. Mr. Hardin, she said, my Josie is having fits. She says a man is standing at the foot of her bed with a red scarf on his neck, and he won't sit down. Varlin? Rook breathed, appalled and fascinated. Calla's bones remembered kneeling horses. They remembered the hot, proud face of a man who expected the world to keep making his kind of sense. But the ledger's cold walked over her lip again, and she heard the answer before the woman finished asking. Not Varlin. A memory of him wearing his thunder like it was clothes. He knocked when the door was already open. She stood. Her body argued. She paid it no mind. I'm coming. Hardin blocked the way, gently but absolutely. You're barely standing. I have standing, she said. That's different. She put a hand on the back of the chair until the floor remembered which way was down. I'm coming. If the door stays open, more will wander in. Better to close it now while it's only a shirt on a chair and not a man on your pillow. The woman, Mrs. Lish, Bradley's wife, the one who worked twice as hard to make up for a husband who tried to tithe his cowardice, folded her hands like a secret and then unfolded them because secrets didn't help. Please, she said. Pike said to pray. I did. It felt like throwing flour at a fire. Rook, Calla said, walk with me. Hardin blocked the way, gently but absolutely. You should go home to your son. Sit at his feet till morning. If he awakes, give him water. If he sleeps, count his breaths until the counting bores you. The boredom is the point. He stared at her for exactly 1 second longer than politeness would have allowed, and then nodded. Because men who build fences know when they've been given instructions worth following. If Pike comes, send him to the well to argue with the bucket. Hardin almost smiled. It looked like it hurt and helped at once. Rook, bring her back to that chair in one piece. Yes, sir, Rook said, suddenly as tall as he would be someday. The Lish house greeted her with the dry quiet of a place that has learned to hold space for the unusual without gossiping about it. Quiet. It was always the first to get sick. Inside, Josie lay on a pallet by the hearth, small as a wish and twice as stubborn. Her eyes were open and looking at a corner where nothing stood if you were the sort of human who required the world to bring a note from its mother before you recognized it. Varlin? Rook made a noise that didn't know what it wanted to be and decided to be a laugh because anything else would have undone him. Hardin closed his eyes once, as if he were telling them something in a language that doesn't tolerate being looked at. Good, Ma Finch said. She sounded like a woman setting a loaf on a windowsill. Now up. Up? Calla croaked. You think they'll let you rest after this? Ma Finch asked. Get your feet under you before the preacher remembers he knows where they keep rope. Hands came then. Not too many, just the ones that had learned the difference between helping and handling. Hardin's were steady. Rook's shook like a colt's, but found the places that didn't hurt to touch. Roe was grave importance, held the shawl and put it around Calla's shoulders like a blanket with a job. Home, Calla said, meaning her own. The lace, the bowl, the tin cross that had been taken off its nail to make room for what the night required. I can work there. You won't work at all, Pike said. His voice gathered courage from proximity to fences and the knowledge that men get violent when they've been scared too long. Preacher, find something useful to do or go to bed, Hardin said without turning. Calla didn't want to fight in the street where the horses still remembered kneeling and the dust still remembered being written on. She took one step. Her knees swore. She took another. The town arranged itself to allow passage. Shame had finished sharpening its teeth and had begun to bite. Rook, she said, run ahead. Light the stove. Sage. He went like boys go when sent on a task that lets them be bigger than their fear. Row, Hardin said softly behind her. Inside. The boy obeyed, but his gaze stayed on Calla until the door took it away. The cat watched her too, narrow-eyed. Cats recognize debt. They know the smell of it. They were gods before they were pets, and they remember the prestige. Her adobe greeted her with the dry quiet of a place that has learned to hold space for the unusual without gossiping about it. Rook had built the fire too hot on purpose. Sometimes boys think heat is the same as safety. The stove accepted the insult and did the right thing anyway. Calla sank to the chair, which complained on cue. Rook hovered near the bowl, sage in awkward hand. Do I? She said. You do. Counterclockwise for calling, clockwise for thanking. Remember that, and you'll keep your eyebrows. He grinned, a cracked little thing that let out more light than it let in. He did as he was told. Smoke rose and turned the edges of the room from hard to possible. Hardin stayed near the door. He had become a hinge, too, swinging between town and house, between man and wall, between father and something the night had made out of him without asking. Tell me the rest, he said, when the room had done its initial shifting into a place where words could matter again. Calla closed her eyes. The black she found there was hers now, the domestic kind that comes when lids lower, and not the ledger's jurisdiction. Rook opened something when he spoke with a voice he didn't own. The breath borrowed to keep him has to learn the road back, or it will try to make a home in him where it doesn't belong. That's when folk go strange. Not evil, just misbuttoned. Can we make the road? We can lay stones. We can sing. We can be polite to the dark like it's an old aunt with bad knees and a good memory. She rubbed the rope marks on her wrists absently and then stopped, because the body enjoys habits more than it should. Resistance let me, she said. I answered with a yes that wasn't for you or anyone else. That's my story, Hardin. Don't make it worse. Hardin's jaw made a small change, the kind men make when they are remeasuring themselves to fit a problem. And you? He asked. I pay, Calla said simply, for a while. With the long name, with quiet. She opened her eyes and held his. It will try to take more. You cannot let Pike name that theft righteousness. Hardin snorted softly, which from him was the equivalent of an oath in another man's mouth. Pike lost the right to name anything tonight. Don't count on that, Calla said. Men like him plant flags in ash and call it a sanctuary. Rook cleared his throat, which sounded like a bird trying out a new song and hoping it belonged to him. Miss Calla? Yes, Rook. When you were... She gestured at the space where her absence had been. I thought about mouth to mouth, like you showed when Miss Daly fell in the creek last spring and breathed wrong, but I couldn't. She did fine. Better than fine. You gave me a reason to make the ledger listen. His ears went red. I ain't much good with numbers. "You will be," she said. "You count the right things." A sound like a tired bird hit the window then. Soft, quick. Rook startled. The sage smoke went a little sideways. The sound came again, a pebble. Hardin was at the door before the third. He opened it to a woman with her hair in a night plait and her fear tucked into the corners of her mouth. "Mr. Hardin," she said, "my Josie is having fits. She says a man is standing at the foot of her bed with a red scarf on his neck, and he won't sit down." "Varlin?" Rook breathed, appalled and fascinated. Calla's bones remembered kneeling horses. They remembered the hot, proud face of a man who expected the world to keep making his kind of sense. But the ledger's cold walked over her lip again, and she heard the answer before the woman finished asking. Not Varlin. A memory of him wearing his thunder like it was clothes. He knocked when the door was already open. She stood. Her body argued. She paid it no mind. "I'm coming." Hardin blocked the way, gently but absolutely. "You're barely standing." "I have standing," she said. "That's different." She put a hand on the back of the chair until the floor remembered which way was down. "I'm coming. If the door stays open, more will wander in. Better to close it now while it's only a shirt on a chair and not a man on your pillow." The woman, Mrs. Lish, Bradley's wife, the one who worked twice as hard to make up for a husband who tried to tithe his cowardice, folded her hands like a secret and then unfolded them because secrets didn't help. "Please," she said. "Pike said to pray. I did. It felt like throwing flour at a fire." "Rook," Calla said, "walk with me." Hardin blocked the way, gently but absolutely. You should go home to your son. Sit at his feet till morning. If he awakes, give him water. If he sleeps, count his breaths until the counting bores you. The boredom is the point." He stared at her for exactly 1 second longer than politeness would have allowed, and then nodded. Because men who build fences know when they've been given instructions worth following. If Pike comes, send him to the well to argue with the bucket." Hardin almost smiled. It looked like it hurt and helped at once. "Rook, bring her back to that chair in one piece." "Yes, sir," Rook said, suddenly as tall as he would be someday. The Lish house greeted her with the dry quiet of a place that has learned to hold space for the unusual without gossiping about it. Quiet. It was always the first to get sick. Inside, Josie lay on a pallet by the hearth, small as a wish and twice as stubborn. Her eyes were open and looking at a corner where nothing stood if you were the sort of human who required the world to bring a note from its mother before you recognized it. "Varlin?"
Calla knelt, aware of how the rope marks on her wrists tasted the smoke, and remembered that some pains are invitations to leave rather than stay. "Josie," she said, "what have we got?" The girl's jaw worked, catching and letting go. "He's there," she whispered, "mad about the song, mad about having to bend. He keeps saying he'll teach my pa how to listen." Bradley Lish's face tried to be brave and decided to be a doorframe instead. He stood in it, ashamed and tired, and ready to be better if someone would explain what that meant in actions his hands could learn. "Pa," Josie said, not looking away from the corner, "don't listen to him. His words are bad sugar." Calla breathed, carefully. If you breathe too much in a room like this, you take up space ghosts want to occupy just to be contrary. "Mr. Varlin," she said to the corner, "if you're here as memory, remember kneeling. If you're here as malice, you're in the wrong house." The air tightened, the way a room does when a storm decides it's worth the walk. Rook shifted behind Calla, caught himself, and went still the way she'd taught him, by thinking of himself as part of the floor. "Sing?" Mrs. Lish begged, hands clasping each other like they could make a shelter out of skin.
Not yet. Kala tilted her head, the way a woman does when she's listening to a child tell the truth in a language that needs translating. Mr. Varlin, she said again, if you've got business, say it plain. The corner exhaled. A thread of cold walked to Kala's lip and went past it towards Josie. Kala put her face in the way and took it. It wasn't much, just enough to understand the shape of the thing. A voice trying on a girl's small throat to see if it could carry in it what a grown man couldn't say without breaking. He's afraid, Kala said softly. He doesn't like the feeling. He'd rather be mean. Mean lets men pretend fear isn't sitting where their heart ought to be. Josie's fingers curled in the pallet blanket. I'm not afraid of him. I'm afraid of my pa when he's afraid. Bradley made a small sound and folded in the middle. Kala didn't look up because the room had given her one chance to finish this clean, and she liked to pay attention when the ledger was generous. Rook, the hinge. He knew. He put his hum under the floorboards and let it rise through the pallet and into Josie's bones, a steady little sound like a mother stirring something that takes all morning. Kala borrowed it, threaded her own through, and aimed the combined note at the corner. Not a reprimand, a lesson. Kneel, she told the memory inside it. Learn your right size, then leave. Something in the air shifted like a man moving his hat to his chest without being told. Josie's eyes softened. The corner emptied the way a plate does when a hungry man finally decides the food is not a trick. It's gone, she said, surprised to be relieved, as children are when their bodies realize they've forgiven someone and forgot to ask permission first. Mrs. Lish sat down abruptly on the floor, which was where her knees had wanted to be since Kala walked in. Bradley put his hand on his daughter's hair and kept it there, like a novice penitent learning the shape of prayer. Thank you, she whispered. We couldn't pay you even if Pike would let us try. You'll pay me by letting that girl sing whenever she likes. If the town hears enough girls sing, it will remember what mercy sounds like. On the walk back, the night had thinned to silk. Rook kept glancing at Kala, as if she might dissolve and leave him carrying a story he wasn't ready to tell alone. What? She asked finally, when the habit of silence began to look too much like fear in him. You didn't sing for Varlin in there, like in the street. You told him to kneel like he'd forgotten how. He had, she said. Most men do, if you let them be comfortable too long. She stopped because the air had changed. Not the ledger's cold this time. The ordinary kind that lives under doors before dawn and tastes like bread that's thinking about rising. Do you hear that? Rook cocked his head. What? The quiet. It's too neat. He frowned. Isn't neat good? Not for quiet. It's trying not to tell us something. They rounded the last bend to her adobe. The door stood open. The stove's light moved on the wall like a kindly animal. And on her table, laid neat as a bill, sat the tin cross she'd taken down. And under it, a strip of red cloth, the exact color of a threat you don't wake up from. Rook went rigid. He came back. No. Kala said. The ledger's cold brushed her lip in agreement. He sent a promise. She touched the cloth. It was clean. It smelled like alkali and the inside of a saddlebag. What's the promise say? Rook asked, though his body had already read it and started learning the arithmetic of how to be brave. Midnight without a face. He meant the new moon, not this one. He'll come when even bold men step careful. He'll expect the kneeling to be forgotten.
She met Rook's eyes. "We will practice remembering." Rook swallowed. "How do you practice that?" "By making the town hear itself. By teaching them the hinge note until the ground hums it back without me." She picked up the tin cross, weighed it, and hung it on the nail. "By paying interest on time." "Miss Kala?" "Yes." "Do you ever get tired of paying?" She thought of the boy's breath against her mouth, shy as a rabbit. She thought of the way Hardin said her name like it was a rope, and the way Pike said it like it was a stain. She thought of Ma Finch laughing at rules and loving them anyway. "Yes, I get tired." She smiled at him. "But I am very good at carrying tired things." A step scuffed in the yard. Another. Not hesitant, measured. Hardin's was, she thought, because she had begun to know his walking the way one knows a creek by its particular talk around stones. It wasn't. The silhouette in the doorway was taller and bent a little in a way Hardin never would be until very old. The hat brim hung like water off a roofline. The man had the posture of someone who expected rooms to explain themselves. "Evening," he said. His voice had traveled and learned to be polite without meaning it. "I believe I'm in your debt." Rook took an instinctive half-step so that he stood between Kala and the door. The boy's courage had decided to practice. Kala put a hand on his shoulder and let it stay there. "Are you?" The man touched the brim. He did not smile. "Name's Landon Pike," he said, and the surname hit the room like a tool left where someone could trip. "Reverend's brother. I've got riders camped east of town who don't kneel for anybody. We're looking for Cade Varlin." He glanced meaningfully at the strip of red on her table, as if he'd scented blood and wanted to know whether it belonged to a deer or a man. "And we aim to collect what's owed." The sage smoke lifted in a single quiet question. The ledger's cold brushed her lip once, twice, 3 times, as if reminding her about schedules, names, and the nature of debt. Rook's hand found the edge of the table and gripped it. Kala raised her eyes to Landon Pike's and measured the distance between the preacher's fear and whatever this man brought with him. Outside, down toward the flats, 9 little points of dust awoke to the wind and began to move very quietly in a line. "Close the door, Rook," she said, without looking away from the man who had just promised a different kind of storm. The boy swallowed. He reached. The latch started down, and a shadow outside stepped into the lamplight, a face she'd last seen kneeling in the street, a red band bright as a wound at his throat, and a smile she could have sworn was carved there by someone without mercy. Cade Varlin lifted 2 fingers to his hat and tipped it, easy as a man greeting a neighbor over a fence. "Miss Merrick," he said, voice pleasant as a brand cooling in a bucket. "Might we've got ourselves a choir now." The hinge creaked.
"Everything costs," he said. "Ask Pike. He'll give you a receipt." Reverend Pike had taken up residence on the church steps with his book open to a page that had taught him who to hate. He didn't speak. Hate's voice had found the evening too crowded with other business. "Drink," Kella said, "for the last time. Rest, then go." Varlin raised his palm and let it fall, and his men drew the way a school of fish turns, together, for reasons the body trusts more than the mind explains. Landon's men answered in kind, hand to iron, iron to threat. The street squeezed. Kella lifted her voice. It was not singing at first.
It was the sound a woman makes to ask people to listen without scolding them into it. The horses turned their ears. The mares sighed. A gelding somewhere out of sight said something rude and then apologized. The men held steady because no one wants to be the first to humiliate themselves. "Remember," she told the dirt, "remember the shape of knees, not just theirs, mine, yours, the way everything bends when it chooses to, instead of when it's forced. The ground obliged the way an old friend does, in the small ways first, then in the large, if asked with care. Hooves marked a kind of prayer, not kneeling, not yet, a bend." Varlin smiled, a slow cruelty, the sort men wear when they mean to let fate do half their work. "Pretty," he said. "Now do it to them." He pointed his chin at Landon's line. No. Kella's throat tasted iron and dust and the pay schedule of the dark. No. Landon's gaze slid to her without leaving the men he meant to watch. "Don't," he said softly, and Kella felt the unusual tenderness of a man who knows someone else will have to carry the poem of what he's about to do. "Save your breath for later." She swallowed and let the hinge note settle under all of it. It was not a command. It was an invitation to be humble. The road loved invitations. It had been asked too many times by men with guns to be a witness when what it preferred was to be a path. Varlin moved his fingers. His men did not fire. They dismounted. Landon blinked. In Kella's face a laugh almost formed. Men who expect bullets don't know what to do with courtesy, even when it's false. Varlin stepped forward, empty hands visible. His horse lowered its head like a man who had decided not to insult his mother in public. "I came to talk," he said. "Call me liar tomorrow. Tonight, hear me. Talk, then leave. He wanted your choir," he said plainly, "but I'll settle for a rehearsal." He leaned, set his hand on his knee, as if to be less a height and more a man. "Sing them to their doors." He tipped his chin toward the windows where children's noses made fog. "Put the town to bed. Then we talk, where men won't break from hearing themselves too true." It was a trap so gentle it might as well have been a gift. Kella could feel the shape of it. If she sang and the town obeyed, Varlin would say she'd proven his point. A voice can make bodies do what they're told. If she didn't sing, Landon's men would have to spend their night being walls instead of teeth, and walls get tired. "Rook," she said without turning, "under my window." "Here," the boy whispered. "Hinge," she said. "Hold it." He put his hand on the sill. He hummed. The house remembered him. The street remembered what choosing feels like. Kella let a sound out then. If singing were water, this would have been the first laugh of a creek after the thaw. Not a command, an agreement. She gave people's feet permission to go where they'd always meant to. Floors, beds, the square of throw rug that had received the day's dirt and welcomed it without judgment. Windows dimmed, doors shut, not slammed, placed in their frames the way a person lays a baby in a cradle, wanting to wake it and not daring. Pike's face pinched as his audience vanished themselves. He turned a page he wasn't reading and found nothing there that would let him stand taller in this kind of quiet. He went inside the church and shut his own door harder than he had to. "Merrick," he said. "Reverend," she answered. "You will not sing tonight. You will not stand in the street. You will not speak to my flock." "Your brother asked me to," she said. "Your brother," Pike said, and something ugly softened a little to make room for love, "is a man who lost his way and found a gun to replace it. And you found scripture to replace kindness," Kella said before she could stop her mouth. Ma Finch clucked somewhere near her ear like a hen who approves of the chick and not the timing.
Pike's hand tightened on paper. "He lost a wife," he said, too quiet for anyone but the three of them to hear. "To a fever with your name on it." Kella swallowed. The ledger's cold lifted, then settled again like it had been surprised into mercy and remembered itself too late. "I'm sorry," she said. "Truly." "You could have sung," Pike said. His eyes flamed with the memory of a kind of help denied for reasons he had not been ready to learn. "I was 12, she said, "with a woman dying in a town that hated my mouth. I didn't know the note yet." Pike stared as if the shrift could be weighed and spent. He failed at doing either elegantly. "Leave," he said finally, "before you make me grateful and I have to forgive you." He went. Rook whistled out a breath. "He told a truth," he said, baffled by the way truths sometimes misbehave and live inside men you've chosen not to like. "He did," Kella said. "It doesn't have to change the rest." Hardin found them at noon with the kind of steps that don't like being listened to. "Ro?" Kella asked immediately. "Sleeping," he said. "Dreaming a little hard. The cat's affronted about it. She'll survive." "You won't sleep," Kella said. "Not until he's old," he said, without trying to make it a joke. "Landon wants you at the livery at sundown." "Why?" Rook demanded before Kella could ask it more kindly. "To put the men somewhere they'll stay put, Hardin said dry. "He says an auction makes folk behave. They stand quiet and forget to fight." "It's not wrong," Kella admitted, "but I won't sing men into stillness while they're holding guns." "Then tell them a story," Hardin said. "Your voice knows more than one path." Sundown turned the livery yard into a stage. Men gathered, because men always do when there's a chance to be seen being brave. Landon set his riders at the corners and in the shadows and told them with their eyes to wait. Pike stood near the gate, a mouth-set judge in a court the town hadn't agreed to enter. Kella climbed onto a bale of hay, because women know height is sometimes necessary for telling men what they already know. "Sit," she said, not like a command, like a mother. Some obeyed on instinct. Some obeyed because the body remembers obedience to a sound that promises rest. They lowered themselves to their heels, then to the ground. The hay bale pricked her calves. Good. Pain makes the mouth careful. She didn't sing. She told a story about a river that forgot it was a river and tried being a road for a season, and how the first wagon broke its axle where the fish were stubborn. She told another about a boy in a town with a hard name who learned to hear bees change their song before it rained. She told a third about a horse that refused to carry a cruel man until the man wept and said his mother's name. By the fourth, men had stopped saving face for a night that would take it anyway and had put their guns across their knees like dogs too tired to hunt. By the fifth was the one she didn't mean to tell, the one about a midwife's hands and a fever and a 12-year-old whose throat had not yet learned the hinge. She did not look at Pike when she said the woman's name. She did not need to. Her face, turned toward the dusk, told the whole congregation what it meant to be a man with a broken history and no tune to mending. When she was done, she sat. No one moved. It wasn't a spell. It was rest. The kind that makes a body remember it prefers kindness. She set her palms on her thighs and waited for the ledger to tap her mouth like a schoolmaster. It did, right on time. The moon did not rise. It simply failed to appear. The night put on its new face, none. Children whimpered and were shushed by the hush of men who had finally found gentleness on purpose. Horses snorted. The ground flexed its old muscles and considered the request that was about to be made of it. Varlin arrived, with the quiet of a good tailor with a bad knife. He had fewer men than last night. That meant the fewer were worse. He posted them like nails along the yard and scratched the stallion's neck once before remembering he was performing and stopping.
He lifted his chin at Landon like a man greeting a mirror he was fond of breaking. "Practice is over," he said. "Sing." "No,"